Let's check out the Q chip component. Like just about every other component in Quasar, I think you're going to love it. So let's say Quasar, new, page, and we'll put it in the components folder, and this is called Q chip page. And now let's open that and see if it's showing up in the menu. There it is, and we're ready to get started. So let's start with a really basic example. Q-chip, and we're going to put inside there the word edible. And there we go. It's as simple as that to make a chip. Another way that we can do this is by using a label, and this is something that I usually tend to prefer using. I personally just prefer having self-closing tags. I find them a little bit easier to look at and easier to grok. So that's the label. We can also put an icon in here, set that to check, and that shows up. We can also put this icon onto the right side if we prefer. And so let's get rid of that and move it back to normal. We can also change the color, of course. Let's set it to green. And then you probably want to change the text color as well in this example. So let's say white for the text color. We can make it outlined by saying outline. Get rid of that. And notice that this is very similar to other APIs like the Q button. We can also say square. That's going to square off the edges a little bit, but still adds a little bit of a curve to them. So I think that looks good. We can also make it dense. And this is especially good in tables or places where you need to have a lot of Q chips. We can also change the size, and we could make it extra small all the way up to extra large. So the classic Quasar sizes that we have available to us. We can also make it dark. In order for that to show, I'll have to get rid of these colors. And there we go. We've got a dark component. And that's most of the API we have available to us in terms of attributes. But later on, we're going to go through a couple of extras we have. For example, clickable, which will do nothing for now, except make it clickable and give us that kind of nice ripple effect. We can also remove that ripple by saying ripple is equal to false. That's pretty much always going to be available when you have the ripple. And what else can we do? We can also set removable, which is going to add this removable button, which doesn't do anything for now, but later on I'll show you how we can use that. And then, of course, disable as well, meaning that you can't click on that element anymore. And on top of that, we also have some events available to us. So let's look at the click event, handle clicked. And there's something I really want to point out here. So notice if I put in, for example, handle clicked, and then a console.log clicked, open up our console, notice that nothing happens when I click on this element. In order to actually make it clickable, we have to add in clickable there. So that's something that's good to know. And now that can be clicked. What else can we do? We've also got other events like update, selected, and then we've also got at remove. And so if something has been selected or deselected, this is going to be called. If something's been removed, then that's going to be called. But we'll dive into that a little bit soon. One thing you might want to do is change this check to an avatar. Avatars are really handy, flexible components. You'll notice that we use them all the time throughout this series. So let's get rid of that icon, and I'm actually going to get rid of the label as well. Open this up, and we'll throw an avatar in there. Q-avatar, and how about just the letter L for now? And there we go, that shows up. To make it a bit more obvious, I'm going to say class equals background dash blue. And then we'll change the text color as well. Text dash white. There we go. And then we can add some text underneath here. And that could say, for example, contact. So that's an example how you could use an avatar inside of a chip. And notice that things like dense still work with the avatar, and clickable still works with the avatar as well. We can also make it so that these chips are selectable. Let me bring us back to our other example. Label is equal to edible. We're actually going to do something with this edible concept in a bit, so it's not just some random word I came up with. We can also say selected.sync, and then say, for example, we've got categories inside of an object, and then edible. And so we'll have to go ahead and create that now. Let's get rid of this method. We don't need it anymore. Return a categories object, and inside that we will have edible, and by default, I'll set it to false. So now what we're basically doing is modeling categories.edible. So we're modeling this value here, And by clicking on it, it's going to set it from false to true, and then true back to false again. In fact, it's often helpful just to throw in a pre-tag here and display that data. I do this all the time when I'm developing. It's super handy. Whoop, it didn't like something there. Aha, I need to throw it within the queue page. There we go. So now we can toggle this on and off, and we can see the example below here. Now let's go ahead and add another one. We've got edible, and let's say poisonous. Ho-ho. And now we can come down here, model poisonous, and set that to false by default. And there we go. That works. Pretty cool. Really easy to model data using the QChip component. Now we can actually model this in a different way. We can model it so that it is removable. So rather than toggling it on and off, we can make it so clicking on a button will actually remove the QChip entirely. And I'll show you how that works. We can just say v-model and then model that same piece of data. So categories.poisonous, and we'll do the exact same thing for edible. Let's come up here and replace that. Edible, save it, and notice that they've disappeared now. That's because categories.edible is currently set to false. However, if I set these both to true, they will now show up. Oh, and we need to add that clearable option as well, that clearable attribute. Oh, sorry, not clearable, removable. There we go. So now if I click on this, it's going to change categories.edible to false, and it will no longer show up. So that's really good to know. However, there might be situations where you want to model whether or not it's visible, so whether or not it's available, and whether or not it's toggled, so whether or not it's checked. So what you might do in that scenario is turn these two into objects. And then you can say available. We'll set that to false by default. And then checked. And we'll set that to false by default as well. In fact, let's change available so that it's true by default, just so it's at least visible. Now we can come up here and model categories.edible, and now this is an object dot available. And we can do the exact same thing with poisonous. And there we go. Notice that when I get rid of that, they're no longer coming up as available options. And now we can paste that down, and let's change this to selected dot sync. And instead of available, we'll change that to selected. So now it's going to model the selected option on edible. So that means, oh, sorry, it's checked. So we want to model checked. Let's come in here and change that to checked. And there we go. I'll paste that in here. Change that to poisonous. And model whether or not that's checked. And look, since the word selected is being used here, I probably want to mimic the API. So I'm going to change all occurrences of checked and change it to selected, just so there's a little bit more congruency between what I've got here and the API. So now we can toggle them on and off. So make them checked, and we can remove them. Oh, that's not working. Why isn't that working? Oh, I didn't paste it down here. So usually this would be a for loop. So rather than copy pasting a bunch of chips down, this would be modeled on some data. But I just wanted to show you this as an example. And there we go, it works. Cool, I reckon that's really cool. And before we finish up here, let's make it so we're actually using this in a more functional way. So we're using these chips in order to filter out a list. So let me bring us back to what we had before. So we'll get rid of the model part, get rid of the selected part, and I'm basically going to take us back to that original status we had it at before. We don't need removable anymore. And we don't want this nested anymore. Let's change that to false by default, and same for poisonous. Yeah, so that's brought us back to what we had before. And I know this is working now, so I don't need those pre-tags anymore. We'll just remove that. Save it. And now what I want to do is have a whole bunch of Australian plants showing up here. And then I want to be able to filter them by whether or not they're edible or poisonous. So let's go ahead and throw in some data here. And by the way, please don't look at this and then use this as an actual tool to use to figure out what Australian plants you can eat. I don't want to be responsible for poisoning anyone. Okay, anyway, moving on. Let's add a few in here. Australian plants. That's going to be an array of objects. Each object will represent a plant. The first one is called river mint. I used to have this growing in my backyard, and we did actually eat it. Once again, I'm not saying that you should eat it. And so that's one. And now we can just paste this down. And I want to have 3 in total for edible plants. Let's add another one that's called mid-yin berries. That's actually a really hard word to spell on your keyboard. Bush cherry. And there we go. So we've got all of those. Let's copy that down and then do 3 poisonous ones. Poisonous. That's the category for them. And the first one is going to be called Angel's Trumpets. And the scary thing is a lot of these are actually backyard plants. Oleander. And the last one, Milky Mangrove. This grows in a lot of people's backyards. However, apparently they're really, really disgusting and bitter, so people rarely get poisoned by them just because they're so disgusting to eat. All right, so let's model this data now. We can come up here, and we can say Q-list, and inside that list we'll have some Q-items, and those items are going to V-model. Actually, before we model it, I like to just get something working. So let's say Q-item-section, and say working inside there. Yeah, there we go. We've got an item. Let's come into the list and say bordered. There we go. We'll also add a margin to the top there. Q-margin top-large. So that's going to separate them a little bit. And the last thing I want to do is add a separator to the items inside of this list. So when we've got a lot of items, they'll be separated by a line. Okay, cool. Now we want to actually model this data. So let's say v-model is equal to plant in Australian plants. And then we can set the key equal to the label because I made sure that was unique. So plant.label. And what's it squawking at there? Oh, sorry, not v-model, v-4. There we go. Let's refresh the page. And I think my server here is flipping out. So let me just quickly restart that. Bring us back to the app. Yeah, that happens on the odd occasion. Now, instead of working, we can now grab the current plant and we'll grab its label. And there we go. Everything shows up in the list. Now, obviously, these buttons don't do anything yet. So let's also make a filtered list. And so we'll make this a computed property. Computed. And we'll call this Australian plants filtered. And there we go. By the way, I often write code just saying the words exactly as they are. So you'll often see people write, for example, Aust, like plant filtered or something like that. I don't like writing code this way because I personally don't think it's that much effort to do the extra typing. So you might as well just type the whole thing out. It makes it easier to grok, in my opinion. You might disagree, which is totally fine. And there are some exceptions like ID, which is very obviously identification and so universal that I will say that instead of writing the word identification. But yeah, that's just a personal thing. So Australian plants filtered. And then I'm going to return here Australian plants dot filter, grab the current plant, and then I'm going to return categories. Okay, so we're going to jump into the categories here and check if the category on the plant is currently selected. So we can say categories and then plant dot category is going to be passed in there. So if this is set to false, then the current plant inside of that will be set to false and therefore it will be filtered out. I'll show you what I mean. Let's save this. Oh, I have to add the word this. And this. Refresh the page. And of course it's not going to work because I now have to make sure we're actually using this computed property. Oh, I spelled computed wrong. There we go. Lucky I caught that. Save it. And now there's the edible plants and there's the poisonous plants. And by the way, if you were turning this into a real world app, you would really want to make sure those categories were correct. Otherwise, some people could end up poisoned. And that is not cool. Okay, so moving on. The last thing I want to do here is make it so that if the list has nothing in it, instead of showing that line, it says something. So how about something like, please select a category. And then what we'll do is we'll say v-if equals filtered Australian plants, Australian plants filtered dot length. So if there are some items inside of that array, then we want the list to be visible. Otherwise, so I'm going to put the not operator here. We'll say, please select a category. Save that. And then here I'm going to have to add v-else. Okay, so if that's empty, please select a category, which is working. And if it is otherwise, just show this list. So let's see if that works, and it does. The last thing I want to show you is the events available to us, and I'm only going to do it on the editable component for now. So at click, we already looked at that, but let's have a look at update selected is equal to handle update selected. And we'll come down here, throw in a new method, methods, and then let's do something. So console.log, and that's going to pull through a value. Save that, open the console. So now it's set to true, and we can hook into that, and it's set to false, and we can hook into that. So that's handle update selected. What about handle remove? Change that to remove. So when an item is removed, call this method here, handle remove. And what we're also going to have to do is change this back to the modeling way of doing things. So v-model, and then we'll also have to make it clearable. So, removable, not clearable. And now what I'm going to have to do is make sure that this is enabled by default. So let's go down to editable. Yeah, this is going to have to be true by default. I just want to show you that this works. Hopefully you believe me. And there we go. So now it's going to be removed, and it's going to show you the new status, which is equal to removed. So that is everything that we have available to us with the QChip component. I really enjoyed building this one, and I hope you got some value out of it. I'll see you in the next video.